I'm going to look at brushes and how they work. So we're going to go from having a quick look at the brush menu straight through to making your own brushes and on from there. So I'm in my Illustrator workspace. I'm setting mine to Essentials Classics, so do that just so that yours looks the same and you have the same toolbars out. And you should end up with the double toolbar. Now click on the brush tool, select it, so the brush tool is in the toolbar. And I can just move over and squiggle around on my piece of paper there. You can change the colour and the width using the stroke up here. Same as we have for everything else. If I double click on the paintbrush tool, I can have a look at these options here, and we have a fidelity option, accurate or smooth. Accurate gives you the option to be more specific with the points. So I can sort of wiggle my brush and you can see that the sort of down and up dips are still there. If I change that to smooth, when I try to make those wonky dips, it will smooth them out. Okay, and you can see straight away the difference. So unless you know where you want it to be, unless you're looking for a particular sort of look, I'm going to set mine into the middle. But you might want to smooth out those shaky things, especially if you're drawing on a tablet. So we've got the brush, we've got the brush options at the top there, and we've got the fidelity of the brush. I'm just going to step back and get rid of all these. Okay. So next I'm going to open the brushes panel. The icon for that is this one with brushes. If you can't see it, you can go to Window, Brushes, and there's my panel. And I can choose from in here, choose the brush tool, choose a brush from in here, and use that brush to draw. And again, I can up the stroke size and I can change the colour here. Okay, so there's a few in there preset brushes already. These top ones are calligraphy brushes and the rest are art brushes. So art brushes have a sort of beginning and an end and a bit in the middle. Calligraphy brushes we'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute, but they can be used to dot around. You've got more control over a calligraphy brush. It can get confusing with a lot of brushes in here as they start to build up, so you can select any and delete them using that. Once you start building up your brush menu, it can get more and more confusing with what's in there. Okay, so the brush panel is separate to the library panel. If we want to add brushes from the brush library, we need to click on the brush libraries menu icon at the bottom of the screen there. And from there I can just pick something out of here. I'm just going to pick the arrows. That gives me the brush library. I can choose something from in here. If I click on it, it will appear in my brush panel. So my brush library is one thing and my brush panel is another. Again, I can change the colour. And some of these things I can change the stroke, can change the fill as well. So brushes you add to this panel will disappear when you close Illustrator. So you can make them stay by clicking on the hamburger menu in the corner and just choosing something that isn't there. Stop there, okay, and start again. When you close Illustrator, any brushes that you've added to this panel will disappear. You can make them stay by finding them in their folder, in their brush library, clicking on the hamburger menu and choosing Persistent, and that will add them to your brush panel rather than just into the library. So there are lots of different types of brushes. There's art, scatter, calligraphic, pattern, bristle, and some others. And so there are lots of different types of brushes. These are art brushes. They have a beginning and an end, and carry on through. If you click on them if you double click in the brushes panel, you get the art brush options for these art brushes. So I can play around with the width in here. If I check preview in the bottom left corner, I'll be able to see what's going on. Scale options we'll look at in a moment. Direction speaks for itself. Colorization, there's some options in here for none, tints and shades, and hue shift. If you want to be able to choose a colour other than black from your colour panel, so if we choose none in colorization, it will automatically be black. If we choose tints, you can select whatever colour you want. I'm just going to get rid of that, and this time I'm going to use a bristle brush, so I can just do a kind of squiggle and look at the bristle brush options. Okay, so this time I'm going to use a bristle brush and just do a kind of squiggle thing, and then have a look at the bristle brush options. So this has got a different set of parameters. We can choose the point, the curve, flatness of the brush, and so on. We can choose the size. Let me just preview it. Bristle length, the density, thickness, paint opacity, and the stiffness of the brush. So if you use brushes regularly anyway, watercolour or acrylic or oil or whatever, you'll have a better idea of the effect that you're going to get with these. But you can just have a flick through. Yes, the next type of brush we're going to look at are the calligraphic brushes. I'm going to go back to the brush library. This time I'm going to look in the artistic brushes and choose calligraphic. Okay, so these are good because you can change the weight of them. So I've got one selected there. Just add that to my brush. Panel, there it is. You get some lovely effects with the calligraphic brush. If I double click on that to open the brush options, I can have quite a lot of control over what goes on here. So I can change the angle, the size. I can make it a little bit more random, and if I'm using a graphics tablet, I can set this to change with the pressure that I have on the tablet. Okay, I'm not using a graphics tablet, so it won't make any difference for me, but you've got quite a lot of control there, and you can visually change the parameters using the icon here, dragging the dots around, and you can see what the brush is going to look like there. So if I change the angle, the roundness, and so on. You can turn type into a brush tool, which is nice because the type settings are often quite limited. So I'm just going to type a thing. So using the T icon there, and I can just go into the properties menu and make that much bigger. Okay. Okay, and with it selected with the black arrow, I can come down to the appearance panel, click on the three dots at the bottom to open the rest of the appearance panel. I can add a new stroke to it, and then I can just assign what I want for the stroke by coming back to the brush panel and choosing what I want, and I can assign any brush that way. Okay, so once again I could change the colour. Okay, so I've got a stroke and a stroke and a fill there. And delete that bit that I just said as well. Okay, so I can select that and I can change the colour or whatever else I want to do. And sometimes when you've got that far, you need to reorder things, and you can place the stroke behind the fill in the appearance channel there. So if I just grab it, I can drag it down behind the fill. And that gives me a different effect on my text. So using the tablet with the pressure sensitive pen, you can vary the width of the stroke based on how hard you press with the pen. That needs inserting a little way back. The blob brush tool is slightly different. So if I right click on the paintbrush tool, underneath that I can choose the blob brush tool. And I'm using the same brush as I have from inside the brush panel, but this creates the outline and fills the shape as you draw, so it's the only tool that works in this way. Most things work with a path and then a fill afterwards. This is kind of the other way around. It self-path finds, so as you cross over, it will automatically join those parts. So you can see that it's moulded itself in together. You can increase or decrease the brush size using the traditional shortcuts. So square brackets to make it bigger and smaller, or if you're on a tablet you can use the pressure sensitive pen to do that as well. So next we're going to have a quick look at scatter brushes. There are some in here already. There are in decorative, mostly decorative scatter brushes, and they are a preset range of brush that you can sort of dot on. You know, they're pre-coloured and ready to go. You can make your own scatter brushes for however you want. So if I come back to the brush panel, I'm just going to make a small oval and get the black selection tool, black arrow, grab my oval and drag it onto the brush panel, and you can see I've got this plus sign, the green plus sign, and that shows that it's actually picked up what I'm doing. If I let go, I can choose the brush type that I'm making. I'm making a scatter brush. I'm going to say OK. And I'm just going to leave the options as they are for a minute. I'll come back to that. So I can select the scatter brush now and use it in the same way that I would an art brush, but it has more options on variation. So as it is, it's just going from sort of one end to the other in a straightforward way. Just deleted it by mistake there. I can make some changes to it, so I'm just going to do a little row. I can change the size in here, and I can also choose for the size to be random, so I can set a minimum and a maximum for the size. I start to get an interesting effect going on there. Or I could change that with the pressure from the pen or tilt or anything else in there. I can change the spacing, and again I could do that randomly. I can change the scatter. And I could change the rotation as well. And again, if I want to change the colour, I need to click on Method, choose Tints, and then I can change the colour. So these are really good for artistic brushes and textures. They're good for randomly distributing things along a path. They're really good for grit textures and smoke and sparkles and so on. So you can create this type of brush out of anything, really, any type of artwork or vector shape. I'm just going to demonstrate. I've got an image of a leaf here, just a plain maple leaf. It's a Photoshop, it's a PNG image, so it was a photograph. I've taken it into Photoshop and removed the white background, not very well, but somewhat. And now I can bring it in and just resize it. Then I can drag that onto my brush palette in the same way as I did with the scatterbrush oval. I'm going to choose to make a scatterbrush. So you can make a scatterbrush out of anything, any image or vector shape. I'm just going to bring in this PNG image of a leaf, and I've already looked at this in Photoshop just to get rid of the white background, so I've got just the outline shape of the leaf. I'm just going to shrink it down a bit. And at the moment it's coming as a linked image and I need to embed it into the document itself. So up here I can just choose embed. And now if I drag it onto my brush palette till the green plus sign comes up, I can create a scatter brush out of it. And then in exactly the same way as the oval, I can start making some changes to the size and to the spacing. To the scatter. And to the rotation. So the next thing we're going to do is create an art brush. And art brushes, like the arrow brushes and the scrolls, they have a beginning and an end. The beginning and the end might be the same all the way through, there might not be a change, but it is there. You know, there is a marked beginning and end. So with art brushes, again, I can make them out of any document. So I can make them out of any image. So I'm just going to look at this PSD. That's so I can make art brushes out of any image. And so I've got this imported page of watercolour paint marks in Photoshop. And I'm just going to get rid of as much of the white background as I can quickly using the magic eraser. And if I have more time, you know, if this was a piece of actual artwork, I would spend some time just making sure that all the white markings, all the white dots around it are cleaned up. I'm just going to select a piece of the mark making, copy it, and paste it into my Illustrator document. Again, I can shrink it a bit, drag it into my brush panel. I'm going to make an art brush out of this. I'm just going to go with the settings for now. Yep. So you can build up lots of nice effects in that way. I'm just going to come over to this document and demonstrate some of the other art brushes that I've already got lined up. Okay, so I've got a kelp leaf here and some other bits and bobs going on, and this eel. And the eel is a particularly good example of stretching and squashing. So with that selected, I'm just going to look at the brush options for the eel. And I fixed the width, and there are some options in the scale here, so I could choose to scale proportionately. So as my eel gets bigger, it will get chunkier. I could stretch it to fit the stroke length, which keeps the width but starts to stretch the tail and the eyes, so everything's starting to come a little bit out of proportion. Or I can choose stretch between guides, and this allows me to select a part of the brush that's not going to have any change and a part of the brush that will be stretched. So I can change that by grabbing these guides and just dragging them up and down, and leaving the inside intact. So now I can stretch that as long as I want to without stretching the head or changing the width. And the rest of these brushes have all been done in the same way. The width is fixed and then they're stretched between the guides, so the stem of the plant will stretch but the plant itself will stay intact. And again for the leaf there and the stem. So while I've got the leaf up, I'm just going to demonstrate the use of colour and tints. So let's start with this one. Okay, so at the moment the colorization method of this kelp leaf is tints. If I choose none, it will revert to the original colour, which in this case is black. Tints will give me whatever colour is in the stroke in the colour panel. Tints and shades will give me, in this case it's taking it back to black, but we'll look more into that in a minute. And there's hue shift as well, which in this case has given me the colour from the stroke. So these kelp leaves are slightly different because they've been built up of 4 colours already. So if I come into it, and we'll look at building up a pattern in a moment, but you can see there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 colours. And if I come into the original brush, it becomes clear how those colours are built up. And at the moment the colorization method is tints. So if I come back to none, you can see, let's just draw a shorter leaf. Okay. So if I come back to the colorization, none will give me the original colour of the brush that I've made. In this case it was multicoloured. Tints will suck out some of that colour because it will try to recolour it with whatever is in the colour palette, and I can change that by just changing a colour. tints and shades. We'll pick out the different colours within my leaf and colour them to the colour palette choice. And hue shift does the same sort of thing, but it's picking the colour from the rest of the shape rather than it's picking the colour from the rest of the brush as well as picking out the colour in the colour palette. So using groups of these shapes now, I can start to build up a scene almost of so using these shapes I can start to build up a scene of pictorial scene. Okay, so you can combine parts to make a new brush, so I can constantly add things, take things away and make more and more brushes. So at the moment I've got here a couple of octopuses, and they're just made out of shapes in exactly the same way. So these are made out of well, literally they're made out of a semicircle and a sort of oval for the octopus itself, and then the tentacles are just made out of more shapes. This set of tentacles was freehand. This one is just circles that have been halved down the line, and some other blobby bits. This line here, the red path, has had a sort of embellishment applied to it, and the blue path has also had an embellishment applied to it. I can reverse that. I think I must have reversed it when I did it originally. I'm just going to reverse path direction. Why has everything got a path on it? Okay, it's made out of these separate shapes. I can select any of these paths and just add to them. This one needs reversing, it's upside down, so if I just go to Object, Path, Reverse Path Direction, it will turn it round for me. And then recolour them. And that gives me the top of my octopus, and then the rest of it is just made up from these brush shapes. And then by varying the colour, I'll get a sort of slightly better effect. And then the octopus itself is turned into a brush. So if I select all the parts I can drag the octopus in. I can choose type of brush. I'm going with art brush. And again, I can stretch between the guides so that the top doesn't get stretched out of proportion and only the trailing bits do. And so I can quickly build up my scene as I have here, and remember with your brush you've got the options to change the colour. Okay. Then remember with the brush you've got the options to change the colour, so I could go with none, which will give me the original black and white example, tints, which will give me a solid set of colours, tints and shades, and start seeing other colours come through, and a hue shift. So it's worth having a play around until you find what you want. So everything is built up in the same way. These fish look, there we go. These fish look really lovely and very intricate, but they are all just a brush. This brush, coloured differently, but the sand, stretched or shortened, but they're all exactly the same brush, and they're made up out of many brushes. So here I've got the different components, the bits of tail, bits of body, scales, and so on. And you can see these are just made up of very simple shapes repeated. That one's a bit splotchy. Okay, so you can have a lot of fun with brushes. You can have a lot of fun with brushes. They're great for different textures, to bring a bit of life to your work, just to make things look a bit different. Once you get a style together, once you start getting your own brush style, that's when you really can dig down into this very stylised sort of illustrative look.